Morning. It's hard to resist to speak about Purim now that it's getting closer. 60 days of Purim celebration. I'm also celebrating 30 years from the Rebbe's final talks. It's this time of year. Parshas V'Yakov, the parsha that we're in right now. Welcome. The Rebbe hinting that it may not require for us to go to the next stage, which is Pekudei, which is where every individual is counted and considered on his own or her own. Welcome. Good morning, Lynn. But it's enough that we have this general drive through the finish line. But there was, even though the Rebbe didn't speak on the next week's Parshas Pekudei, that we're left with that message that is what's required of us now. There is not going to be a person that's going to say, okay, guys, get a ticket and to El Al. You're going to have to elevate yourself. The aliyah occurs within the person. It's an individual process. And the Rebbe says it happens from immediately when you wake up in the morning. That's when you identify not as a shtick behema, as we were told in yeshiva, as a miniature animal, a piece of animal, but we're a piece of God. Chelik ilakam imal mamish. That's the first thing you're supposed to recognize. Even though the message is always like, we don't trust you. You are just someone driven towards pastures you shouldn't be on. So immediately you're supposed to wake up from that sleep. As Rambam writes, Yesheni behevle hazman. The people who are wasting their life sleeping in this meta, in some kind of imagined existence, and don't have a recognition of their journey that they're on, those people are not woke Jewish. Welcome, Rachel. So the beginning of Avodah, the Rebbe says, is to wake up from that. To wake up from this idea that you could just, lo aleinu v'lo aleinu, it should never be, the Rebbe says, that you should waste yourself in the vanities of the world, in the waste of time. You have to wake up from also this type of sleep, not just getting up in the morning. Wake up from this idea that there's no purpose at all. And the very first step of Aveda, at least in our times, I don't think they probably told people this 400 years ago. Before the Baal Shem Tov, I don't know what it looked like. I know what the Baal Shem Tov came to revolutionize, and that I can relate to very well. The idea of elitism, that's sort of, welcome, Sean, good to see you. The idea of an elitism that the Baal Shem Tov came to just blaze a path right through that. Isn't that what Mashiach's all about, to bring that message out to the masses, as Mashiach told the Baal Shem Tov on his spiritual journey on Erev Rosh Hashanah that he wrote to his brother about, when we have the handwritten letter. It's incredible. People think the Baal Shem Tov was some mythical figure that maybe lived in fairy tales. We have his writings. Study the Torah. That's the greatest miracle of any tzaddik. Not that they could walk through a wall or walk over a river with their gartel. All these incredible stories. That's not what a tzaddik's all about. The Baal Shem Tov was to give this message that every single person is absolutely the most important person in the world. Exactly the message that parents have to give children these days. The Baal Shem Tov is like the father of Chassidus in that sense, to tell us. Here the Rebbe is saying the first thing you're supposed to recognize is you identify with the essence of God. My mission is everything. Everything. It doesn't matter about Trudeau. And even I have to admire the truckers. I can only say good. A Jew is actually a spark of God in a body. From above, mamish literally meaning in a body. Mamash is something you could feel. So divinity that feels is called mortal, but we're supposed to bring infinity to that. Kol hanal bad gashas miuchedes kishareim b'shanim achreim. And then the Rebbe ties it in with Zionism, as we said yesterday at length. So you give yourself entirely over to elevating yourself. You put the 10 powers of your soul into it, connects with the 10 spheres, and that is what leads to Yakel is Kal Gadol Yeshivu Heina. Here we're going, Heina is the 50. Here you're going to return as a great congregation coming together to the singular purpose. Okay, I want to continue in Terror that we learned yesterday. We were speaking about the holy beast, the lion. You know, it seems mild in a sense, like the idea of a golden calf. A calf is like a sheep compared to a lion. Why didn't they worship a lion? So the lion is something you're afraid of. It goes to the lowest level. You have to express sovereignty that penetrates even the lowest level. So you have a lion, this unkosher animal that's very wild and unruly. You don't want to get in his path. So it represents this idea that it blazes through everything. Remember, the altar had a fiery lion miraculously appear there to eat up the sacrifices. But you don't see that, do you? So in the time of exile, we don't see the truth. It's something you have to figure out as opposed to something that was apparent in the times of the prophets, as we'll read about right now. So the Alter Rebbe goes on in Megillus Esther. It's the mimer that Avram didn't know us, we didn't recognize Yisrael, etc. But it connects here Purim with Yom Kippur. They have the same word in it. It's about a lottery. It's about throwing yourself into the wild and coming out as the lion on top. So that's expressed by the idea of Mordechai going out from the king dressed in royal garments. I'm just resisting a lot of comical. I'm trying not to do that. It takes a concentration to not do that. So he was wearing royal garments because when a lion goes out, he impresses everything at all levels. So the child goes out to the parade, he sees Mordecai in these fancy clothes. It's something noteworthy that a sage is decorated like that and honored. And we had that Kabbalistic line that Yisaid Abba benukva shaloyal yadei zerampen. This total transparency of the masculine forces of Zeranpin so that Chachma can go down there. So Mordechai's this force of wisdom. He had insight and he saw. In the time of exile, typically, Mordechai was an exception, but even his miracles were invested within nature. It says that your signs I did not see. We did not see. Einoid Navi, there's no prophet. We don't know what's going on. Because in the time of exile, the vast majority of miracles take place within nature itself. That's the point of exile, that the Shekhinah, the awareness, the obviousness of divinity, if it's through meditation or elevating yourself, or from a revealed miracle that could affect the Shifcha Al-Yam, the most common maidservant, saw that at the splitting of the sea. So it can be imposed or it could be seen. When it says your signs we did not see, it's going to talk about the lack that's on our vision. We're lacking vision, so it's more difficult to see. We don't have prophets because, okay, listen. Mostly in our times, God has control over the world, and if he wants to sway things in a certain way because the souls need to experience certain things on their journey, he makes miracles if nature doesn't accommodate that. But it could be invested in nature, like in the times of Xerxes, the wicked king. having no facial hair at all in 300. But clearly that's impossible because he probably had that Persian. Alexander the Great, they got it a little better. That looks like a Persian guy, but I guess I've never been to Persia, so I wouldn't really know. It's you couldn't see that something beyond nature was happening here. Everything was happening behind the scenes, and having these seemingly arbitrary direction that leads exactly where you need to be. But it took some subterfuge. How inappropriate to invite Haman to the party with the king. That means Esther wanted to simply enjoy the king in a public environment. But their public environment was just their crowd. If they're inviting Haman into their scene, it was inappropriate, and that led to the parallel for that is drawing Klippa, or not necessarily drawing it, but if Klippa approaches you and you're at a frequency that's so high, they get obliterated on their own. They end up confessing things and groveling and looking really bad in the eyes of Xerxes, Achashverosh. If you see Achashverosh as Xerxes, I think it will be a better Purim for you. You should see it. I just love that last scene with the spear. Achashverosh getting his face here, and he's totally aghast that it could happen to him, that he's actually mortal. He does in the story of Purim, he does represent God in the world. So there is that suggestion in a sort of holy and religious sense, but I don't think he actually made that claim, did he? Well, Haman did, so I guess how much more so his master. Haman said, bow down to me. He put the... Okay, so Mordecai went bow. Anyways, so you have miracles in the whole Purim story that happen in a way that you could say it's a coincidence. But look how favorable things turned out when the lottery of life is cast in your favor, when the whole system is rigged in your favor, because that's the purpose of creation. Raka Yedei Avas Esther. It was the love of Esther that caused these events to transpire in a miraculous way. If you look at it with the genuine observing eye, you could see that everything was above nature. And this is because you had a miraculous initiative instituted, but that came down to reflect into the matrix, into the world that we see. But it did it in a way that it came into the garments of nature. It was very organic. So when times are good and God's smiling on everybody, then it's like the cherubs face each other. So the supernal attributes are shining in the world. If there's goodness in the world, that means that there's chesed, there's divine benevolence reflected in the world. So in a time when God's, it's not expressive of a dynamic that is facing each other. Remember, we spoke about that at length, I think, a couple days ago. Then the message has to be experienced and perceived at the level that we've fallen. We're not seeing face to face. We don't see divinity in a way that's miraculous necessarily. It's in a veil, and the veil is called nature. So when we're looking at each other face to face, then miracles are obvious, whether they are actually the splitting of the sea, or it's just like something that's so obvious to you that it's even more impressive in a way, that it's so elegantly injected into the physical world too. Miraculous conduct. Like the Rebbe Maharash had said, he won the lottery 3 times. I don't know what that means. What was like the community the bingoed, or was it like he became? I know he was very wealthy. I think he had a golden cane. I'm not sure. That's when God shines into the lower worlds of creation and even the physical world. When you're looking face to face. It's drawn to the right of Maisha. I guess that means that there's this illumination of the lower realm. That's why in those times, when it was expressive of a time of God facing us face to face, you had prophets. You look at someone when you talk to them. The prophets had this relationship of Hashem face to face. Perish shluchim memides dekdusha. Nevi'im, prophets, are simply divine energy that's put itself in a very mortal human form. But it's a clear shining of divinity, because the person's a good person in the most simple sense. But here they're also usually gifted with tremendous abilities to even be in the front line, like David HaMelech, who was said to be Malchus of Atzilus, sovereignty of the highest realm. You have these prophets where you take divine energy and put it into the world. And that divinity speaks. So because God creates the utterances on their lips. And Nevi'im all come from the attributes that are beneath Chesed and Gvura. You have Netzach and Haid, which are beneath supernal kindness and severity. You have their perseverance, which are called victory and splendor. Victory, you just keep going, and splendor is this submission. That is the source of prophecy. So all prophets are associated according to the body. So you have the right and left arm is chesed and gvura, kindness and severity. And then you have the thighs, or the loins, which are victory and splendor. So why is that, and how does that relate to prophets? Perish netzach v'haid hem trei palge de gufo, klalis yaitseis mevashle hazera. So here we're talking about the part of the body that is associated with the kidneys and the testicles. Hayek tehiyah hamshacha, which is spiritually associated with how the divine energy is going to come into the world. It's called hamshacha, drawing energy into the world. That's associated with mavashle hazera, the lower spheres, netzach v'haid, victory and splendor, are associated with producing the ability to communicate, the ability to extend beyond yourself. In Hebrew, hamshacha, min bechinas yisaid, from the yisaid. Yisaid is foundation, it's the reproductive organ. Kiyadua, vehen lebar megufa, and they are considered outside of the torso. So it's all about bringing out your message, being able to communicate. That's why you have prophets who communicate divine messages, because they're shluchim mimidas dekdusha, messengers of divine attributes. Perisheinim na'atzmus haguf shehem me'amidas chesed v'gvura rak shluchim lishleach davar mipneihem. So he explains what it means, that the fact that the loins are outside of the torso, it means that the body, the torso, is the character traits of kindness and severity. But they are the messengers of those attributes. So they have to extend beyond the torso into the thighs. Lishleach davar mipneihem v'hu inyan nevi'im. To a messenger would travel. It has to do with going out. It has to do with speaking. So these are the prophets But when the divine attributes were departed from the world, and the illumination remained from the Yesod of Abba, so it went up, back, removed to a higher frequency, but not necessarily in the tangible world. Then Yesod Abba only can appear in the lowest realm. So you're talking about Yesod Abba, which is the foundation of wisdom. So how are you going to get wisdom to emit and relate to the lower realm? You had prophets to do that. You had a time where it's like the divine facing the soul. Everything is face to face. So you had these shluchim that are associated with the lower part because it's about communicating outwards. And in order now, since that departed, there's this histalkus of that ability. It was less obvious to get into that realm of prophecy, divine communication. So therefore the message had to be embedded within a lower frequency. That's Purim. And that's the lion. Al pi hateva shehu bechinas Elokim gematria hateva. So that's why the word Elokim, which is translated as Lord, corresponds to the numerical equivalent of the word for nature, hateva. Is that enough for today? TikTok is like 5 seconds I have to say the thing in. Tear it up, Rabbi. The Gula will be very soon. Amen. Okay, there's just one more paragraph in this whole mimer anyways. We can do that. Esther. So we have to understand, what was Esther doing? She was acting on her own. She didn't have her uncle Mordecai's advice, or her husband rather. So she makes 2 meals. Why? Why did, if she had a thing to ask, why? And it's everything is about timing. So why would you wait to the next party? Do it at this party. For some reason we skipped to Rachel. I guess she was the progenitor of Esther somehow. I thought Esther was associated with Sarah. But here Rachel is described as the Keres Abayis. I guess it's because she's the matriarch who had another contemporary, her sister, as another wife of her husband Yaakov. But she was the mainstay of the home. And therefore everything that had to do with the home, which is the world, is her domain. So Esther seemed to be following something that I guess Rachel's going to teach us. Ubayla Mordechai Yesod Abba. So Mordechai, the husband of Esther, who represents the Yesod Abba, the ability of wisdom to express itself and maybe hopefully come into the world. Shalakha loy lebas. So he took Esther as his daughter. Batachba, remember we said before, lebas means lebayas, to her home. It was an allusion. And here we also mention a keres abayis. Rachel was the mainstay of the home. So I don't think it here means daughter in the literal sense. I think it means that she lakha loy, she took her. Also the term for marriage is an acquisition like that. Ba leiv baila, batach ba leiv baila. So that means they had this confidence and trust in their hearts for each other. Shebavadai lei sase lei tasa davar shalei kahugan chas v'shalom. Certainly, by making 2 parties, not on the advice of Mordecai, was not something that was done inappropriately and in breaking with her respect with her husband. Certainly she was batach bo leiv baila, that they had confidence and faith in their integrity, even the most trying circumstances. When she's forced to marry a Gentile king. That's why she, on her own volition, she decided that she's going to make 2 meals, 2 banquets, 2 feasts, es Haman, until she elevated Haman in this way, the karavta yeser midai el hakdusha, bringing him so close up and intimate, full frontal encounter with holiness. Esther was the very righteous woman prepared to give everything away for her people. She saw the opportunity of bringing Haman close, come to her inner circle, and there, what's going to happen to darkness when you bring it close to a source of holiness? And then he automatically falls. Literally, he fell. Because it's so pure that impure forces can't receive anything positive from it. They're not able to nourish from it, is the term here. By being that he's trying to deny the existence of holiness in the world by saying that, by being self-centered and narcissistic, that it's all about him. Selfishness of Haman was unbelievable. Just for his personal respect, he wanted to wipe out an entire nation, because Mordecai wouldn't bow to him, ostensibly. So when you bring something that denies the existence of God into the room of someone who totally stands up for godly purpose, like Esther, we called it Avas Esther above, the love of Esther. Elek keshehu meruchach mekdusha. The only time Klippa can gain something from the holiness is when it's at a distance from it. So when there's Gentile nations around the world and Jerusalem is a holy source of a religious city, that extends to the entire world, and you could have even unclean forces getting their kedusha from there. But when you bring it too close, like in the second Suda, I suppose, I guess the second one is like the after party too. Why is Haman coming to the after party? Wasn't the first enough? The kol mashehu yeser karav al kedusha. Whatever extent you get closer to holiness, mispatam alav kehimas steinag. Any evil that comes into the inner circle of holiness immediately melts away, mipnei eish, from before fire, like melting, like wax before fire. V'lachen krova es Haman betachlis akirav. Thus she reached out to him with the most overt gestures, laishiva besudas hamelech lamalka, to cause him to return to the after party of the king and the queen. Kamaim Razal called Kad Aryi v'Araisa Kaimi Velaman de Avar Benayu. When the lion and the lioness stand together, woe unto the one who gets between them. So they came to an intimate setting at the after party of the king and queen. He was in a very close proximity to Esther. It was very inappropriate for her to do this, and it required a special trust that Mordecai had with Esther, that this is something that was totally with foresight. So when at the first party, she saw that he still maintained some of his own audacity, she took the she made the decision to make a second party, until the opportunity for Haman to have fallen from other events that he was subjected to, like parading Mordecai around as the hero in the royal garments. So he comes back to the second party, he's already downcast. Before that, he had too much power, he was able to resist the exposure to holiness like that. But in the second one, he was already lost some of his own stature. That's why it says the king and Haman today arrived. Meaning that when one's in exile in Babylon, the Shekhinah accompanies them. And God was with them in exile. So the king, when it says Hamelech v'Haman, the king came with Haman. It's a reference to Hashem being with Esther when the wicked adversary Haman, the villain, approaches. Esther hi akeres habayis. So here before we called Rachel the mainstay of the house. Here Esther is B'kedusha, the house of holiness, al pi pashut. So anything that has to pertain to Hanhagas Eilam, we called it before, things that have to do with the world, things that are relevant to people in the world. That's what the woman is responsible for in the Jewish tradition. So she establishes the home in the sense that she sets the priorities of how things are going to conduct themselves in the house. In terms of how do you arrange the world, what atmosphere is it going to have? How are you going? What kind of behavior is appropriate in my space? Al pi pashut. So the simple understanding is she got to set that environment. B'klipos namar al ti tikva. And regarding the dark forces, it says there is no hope. The word tikva, you're probably familiar with that word, hatikva, the hope, is a composite of two words meaning tikvinartik le vavke. It's a concealment. A tik is like a cloth, like a bag. You put the bag over the head of the vavke, the latter two letters of God's name. So tikva, here there's no tikva there's no hope for the klippas. That's because klippas, the function of a klippa is to conceal, like a husk conceals what's inside the wine grape. So it's a husk, it's a concealment for God's letters Vavke. So you only have Yudke, which is the wisdom and that realm, and the Vavke, which is about physical life, that it doesn't shine through. The wisdom is not shining through to that lower frequency, and they're separated. Lahafrid Yudke, the Kravas es Haman, Kolkach. So Esther brings Haman so close, Ad Shenisbatum Alav, until he fell on his own sword. Basically, he just couldn't handle that. Read the story. V'nishar tziruf havaya. So therefore, he came out of the sackcloth. He came out of the sack, rather, the tikva. There's no hope for klippa. Esther brings Haman, the opposition, the obstacle to holiness, so close to her that it totally was nullified, and therefore you have God's name whole again. Remember, God's name is said to be unwhole until a Amalek is destroyed. Haman is associated with Amalek and Esav, who is the granddaddy of Amalek. Vaisatalu al eitz, but he was hung on a tree or on wood. Ki Haman hitopur who have Gairol, because Haman was one who cast lots to decide the fate of the Jewish people, or what day his evil plan could be attempted. Lifnei Haman shepilu lefanav v'leihu ba'atzmai. It says they cast lots before him, but he didn't actually throw the dice. Interestingly, Lynn says, awesome insight into strengthening the vessels. Haman's vessels couldn't take it when he got too close, and he just is like taking the nartik off him, the satchel off of him, in the outcomes from the birthday cake. So they cast lots before Haman. This is a remez to making a casino for Purim. They cast lots before him, but he didn't throw the dice himself. lifnei Haman shepilu lefonav v'loy hu ba'atzmai shehaklipa reitza lidamas l'kedusha. Because Haman wanted to be like a holy guy that could enter the world, the random world, and come out on top. But it's just a resemblance. They can't actually throw the dice. Kekef bifnei Adam. It's like a beast before a man. It's like a monkey before a man. So Klippa tries to look like a normal person. He wanted to be at that party and say, I belong here, but it was impossible. The veil, it looked like he took the mask off the guy, and he sees it's another mask, of this one of a monkey, trying to pretend to be a man. So he's got the face of a man on top of a mask of a monkey. Ve'inin hagera b'mikdash hu. So a monkey, the idea of a monkey is that it's a resemblance of a human. So you want to pretend that you could enter the world of random and you're going to be on top. Do you have equal chance? You're drawn so close to Ester's world, the world of holiness, it's not going to withstand. It will self-destruct and melt away. Vinyan hagero b'mikdash hu shepel hagero kedem shiapel hagero ena yedeh eich yipel. The whole idea of casting lots, as it was done in the Holy Temple when you had these two goats on Yom Kippur, etc. The idea is you don't know at first you don't know the fate of these two things. Lazeh or lazeh, it could go either way. Like we were saying, an udder in general, you don't know which way the fish are going to swim. One could go this way, one could go the other way. And the lot is like a resolution that's one you chose that's going to be cast to the cliff, and the other one's going to be brought close on the altar. And if it received the lot of going to be a sacrificial goat as on the altar, it can be an atonement for the Jewish people. Because that close, you at that level, when you're so close to Hashem, there is no sin that any longer separates, and anything that was done purposefully rebellious and inappropriate, that becomes merit. When you take yourself really close to God, I guess it's implying a type of tshuva here. Purim is all often associated with tshuva, as Yom Kippur and Purim are here linked. That's why this lottery is cast or selected specifically in the Holy Temple, because it's a very lofty experience, and therefore it has to be in a holy place. It's the idea of entering the world of randomness and coming on top. It's the idea of the assurance that your path, even though it meander off a little bit, is intended ultimately to bring you very, very close to God. And that's why it was Haman's wicked plot, because he comes from Esav, which represents a haughtiness, wanting to fly up like an eagle in one's own self-aggrandizement. Good morning to you. With chutzpah, besnasus, self-exaltedness, lidamas l'kedusha, to try and resemble holiness, which is intended to wear the royal cloaks, as Mordecai ended up doing. This evil force wants to resemble that, and that is an arrogance. So he makes this gallows 50 cubits tall, de tuma de klippo, which is the impure forces of klippo, debria, neged nun ama Mordechai de kedusha. He wanted to take the holiness and put it up 50 amas on his gallows, which is Mordechai. V'ratzalit leisis Mordechai v'lika chayas me Mordechai the kedusha bebeis Haman. He wanted to take the holy power associated with Mordechai, all the energy he represents of holiness, and bring it in like a vampire into his life force, into his house, it says here, bebeis Haman, into his net worth. V'ksiv asher shalat ha'adam ba'adam l'ralei. And it says you could have this conflict, and it's to l'ralei, for bad to him. Chel bala v'yeki anu adam blial reitzilach teif yenika magdusha v'nefachu. So this process of this, here Haman was like this fish that wanted to swallow up the little fish. He ends up becoming chased by piranhas. He wanted to swallow up the power of holiness, and he ended up v'nefachu, transformed. Shebeis Haman nitna l'Mordechai davko, because the whole household of Haman was granted to Mordechai. So Haman wanted to just take the power of Mordechai. He was a prominent diplomat and sage, and take everything that he had and bring it into his power. And the opposite happened. So everyone should rely on Purim as a source of transformation, to